Here we have the Acer Predator X25 360Hz, the third available 1080p 360Hz G-Sync monitor for you aspiring pros and already pros. But is it any better than the Asus and the Alienware, or does it perform just the same? Let's take a look starting with the pixel response times. The Predator has 3 overdrive settings and backlight strobing, just like the Asus and the Alienware. First, we have the Acer Predator at 360Hz with all overdrive levels. With the overdrive setting set to off, it does pretty well, but if the overdrive is increased to the normal setting, it does better, albeit with some corona artifacts or overshoots. This is totally acceptable, at least in my opinion, because it's not like a crazy high amount of overshoot to where it'll ruin the gaming experience. It's hardly noticeable. Now, when it comes to the extreme setting, Acer, are you okay? Hopefully, I don't need to explain to you why this is bad, because I won't.
I'm always pretty good. Are you doing all right?
But now that you know what the Acer looks like by itself, this is how it looks compared to the competition. With all monitors set to their lowest overdrive setting, the Acer does the worst with the longest trail, the Asus takes second place with less of a trail, and the Alienware takes a crown with almost no trail. It's kind of crazy how good the Alienware looks with its lowest overdrive setting. Now, if we increase the overdrive settings to the middle settings, they all do about the same, but I'd still prefer the Alienware's fast setting over everything else here because it looks just as good as the higher overdrive settings on all monitors, but without the overshoot. At 240Hz, things stay unchanged. The Alienware still has the best overdrive, and when it comes to the backlight strobing results, they all perform identically. The same happens when we drop to 144Hz. The Alienware still has the best overdrive, and they all tie when it comes to backlight strobing. Though in the grand scheme of things, even though the Alienware seems to do better than the Acer and the Asus, the difference is so small that it's almost impossible to notice the difference, even if you put all 3 monitors side by side. On top of that, the response times are already really good for all 3 monitors that I doubt 99.9% of people that are using any of these monitors will complain about motion blur. If for whatever reason you think that their standard response times aren't good enough, then you should be looking at the backlight strobing results, which only work at a maximum refresh rate of 240Hz, have a lot of overshoot, and can cause eye strain and headaches if you're sensitive to the technology. And if you're fine with all that, then choose any monitor because they all perform identically. Yes, that includes the Alienware. When I made the review for the Alienware, I said that the monitor's screen brightness isn't affected when you use the backlight strobing or black frame insertion technology. I don't know what kind of crack I was smoking, because when I asked Alienware to send me another review unit to gather updated data, turns out that the screen brightness does lower, by a lot, from 454 nits down to 215 nits. It's a similar story with the Asus, which goes from 432 nits down to 208 nits, and the Acer, which goes from 420 nits down to 213 nits. While that is half the maximum brightness, it's still bright enough for most people to be satisfied as long as you don't have a lot of sunlight seeping into your room. But as you now know, performance between all 3 monitors in this area are identical. The same goes for the gaming experience. I assume they all use the same AU Optronics 360Hz panel because all 3 monitors look and feel identical. Even though the Acer has the highest input lag of the bunch at 2.2 milliseconds, whereas the Asus and the Alienware have about 1.6 milliseconds, that difference between the Acer and its competition is so small that you won't feel the difference at all, I guarantee it. If you enable G-Sync, which yes, all monitors have a physical G-Sync processor in them, input lag between all monitors increase anywhere from 0.3 to 0.4 milliseconds, which is so small that it won't impact the gaming experience at all. However, if you plan on using backlight strobing, it does increase the input lag a little bit more, with all monitors ranging in between 5.5 and 6 milliseconds, but that's still extremely low, and I know almost anyone won't feel the difference at all. So whatever monitor you get and whatever settings you use, any of these will be the most responsive monitors you can buy today. Input lag is so instant that you feel at one with a computer rather than the ugly high input lag disconnected feel that we had to deal with in TVs years ago. All 3 monitors have very similar out-of-the-box color performance, covering around 95% of the sRGB color space, 65 to 70% of the Adobe RGB color space, and 67 to 71% of the DCI-P3 color space. So while they're all suited for general media consumption with its great sRGB coverage, there's basically no wide gamut support for the professionals who want to be at the top of their A game while editing photos or videos. This is for professional gaming, not professional editing. Out-of-the-box color accuracy surprisingly wasn't bad. While the Alienware did the best with an average delta E of 3.1, the Acer wasn't too far behind with a slightly worse 3.5, and the Asus does the worst at 4.75. Now, if you don't know what a delta E is, Kalman Ultimate, which is the software used for these tests, tests for 47 different colors, grabs the average, and tells me what that number is. The closer that number is to 0, the more accurate a monitor is. A delta E of 1 is perfect, 2 is great, 3 is good, and 5 is bad, at least for professional settings. So while the Asus is technically bad, it's only bad in a professional setting, meaning photo and video editing. For general use and media consumption, this is totally fine, and there's no reason why anyone should go out of their way to get these types of monitors calibrated, because games don't usually support color profiles, you have to recalibrate it once a month, and none of these monitors support a wide enough color gamut anyways for you to be able to use them for professional editing in any meaningful way. Anyway, when calibrated, they all do perfect with a delta E of less than 1. It also corrects the grayscale performance. Now, I won't be talking too much about this, so if you want to analyze the grayscale chart, here's the uncalibrated data, you can pause if you want, and here's calibrated. Again, if you want to analyze it, pause now, because what I think is more important is the actual experience you get when using monitors like these, to which I say, they all do just fine. They're 25 inches, have a 1080p resolution and an IPS panel, so they don't perform exceptional at all, but rather standard. Colors are good because it has an IPS panel, but they're not as vibrant as Agile Splendor or Nano IPS panels, so colors will look very similar to most IPS monitors you've used before. They all get pretty bright, hitting anywhere from 420 nits to 455 nits, which is plenty bright to out-brighten the sun if you have a lot of sunlight invading your room. But with the lack of a VA panel, mini LED or FALD, or full array local dimming, contrast ratios were mediocre at best, with the Asus having the highest at 1186:1, the Alienware doing the worst at 887:1, and the Acer landing somewhere in the middle at 956:1. They all include HDR, but again, with the lack of the aforementioned VA panel, mini LED and FALD, and a peak brightness of around 450 nits, there's not much to say other than they all suck, so I'm not going to waste my time on this part. Backlight bleed wasn't an issue in any of these monitors, and IPS glow was about as standard as it gets. Viewing angles are also the same on all three monitors because, well, they all probably use the same panel. And lastly, before we move on, no matter which of the three you get, they all get as low as 40 nits of brightness, making it easy on your eyes in dark settings. And speaking of dark settings, the black equalizer on all three monitors are just okay. Let's start with the Acer since it's the newest monitor here. Here's the black equalizer off, then cranked all the way up. Compare that to the Asus, and the Asus is slightly brighter. It's the same story with the Alienware, where it's about as bright as the Asus. The Acer and Asus also include color vibrance, which makes it easier for you to distinguish your enemy from their background if an enemy's character blends in with a wall or something. And both work very well. The Alienware, on the other hand, doesn't have color vibrance, so it loses here. In terms of Escape from Tarkov, I won't be testing the black equalizer in that game anymore. I know what you're thinking. If you're a long-term viewer, don't worry, you'll be fine, because if you go to the post-effects settings in the game, you can crank all the settings and it looks way better than what these monitors provide, and works just as well as the BenQ Zowie lineup of monitors, which is really surprising. I'm not sure how long that was there since I never messed with the settings, but that's probably been there since day one, and my mind just totally ignored it every time I pressed the escape button. Anyway, because I won't be testing Escape from Tarkov anymore, let me know what competitive game you think I should start testing as a replacement. As long as it has a good amount of daily players, is a competitive or esports title, and has a different color tone to Siege, this means don't recommend CSGO, then we're good to go. Lastly, we have the OSD and the monitor itself. The OSD on here is pretty good, but at the time of recording, Acer's display widget software doesn't support this monitor, so you'll have to adjust everything via the buttons and the nipple like some kind of caveman. Once you have the full menu open, it looks just like any other Acer OSD, but with some extras since this monitor includes Acer's Vision Care 4.0 suite of features. A lot of it is marketing goobly-goop, but I'll elaborate as we go through the OSD. First is the picture settings, which has the brightness. This one's pretty cool because unlike literally every monitor where you adjust the brightness from 0 to 100, this monitor tells you the actual nits of brightness you're setting it to. Now it's not perfect because if you're at 450 nits, it's actually 420 nits. At 225 nits, which is half the brightness, it's actually 240 nits, and 40 nits, which is the lowest, is actually accurate at 40 nits. So the lower you go, the more accurate it gets, and even if you max it, it's close enough. Moving on, next we have the contrast, blue light, dark boost, which is the black equalizer, SDR/HDR variable backlight, which is the dynamic contrast ratio, or DCR, backlight response to tell the DCR how you want it to act, auto brightness, and max brightness, which unlocks the monitor's peak brightness from being 225 nits to 450 nits. Next is color, which has relative gamma. This lets you adjust the gamma higher or lower in increments of 0.2. Color temp, which lets you choose between warm, normal, cool, blue light, and user. Next, we have the G-Sync processor setting, which has G-Sync esports, which according to NVIDIA, ensures the lowest latency by turning off variable backlight, and it also increases black levels with their dark boost technology and fine-tunes gamma levels to offset darker contrast areas. Basically, it turns off all processing, turns on the black equalizer, and lowers the gamma so you can see people easier. Then we have NVIDIA Reflex Latency Analyzer, which tells you the latency for a couple of things, as long as you have a supported mouse. And ULMB, which is the backlight strobing or black frame insertion. Next is the gaming setting, which has the overdrive. You can enable the refresh rate on the corner of the display so you know what the monitor's refresh rate is set to, and a crosshair in case your game doesn't have one. Lastly is the system settings, which has the lighting settings to control the extremely bright RGB on the back of the monitor, hotkey assist to change your shortcuts when you press any of the buttons on the back of the monitor, proxy sense, which apparently means that the monitor reminds you to take breaks. I don't need that. And lastly, deep sleep, which is just the monitor going into sleep mode. Like I said earlier, this doesn't support Acer's display widget for whatever reason. I was confused why Dell's Display Manager doesn't support their new 360Hz model, and someone in the comments said it had something to do with NVIDIA's features, so that may be why this software doesn't support this monitor. In any case, I think that's dumb. Then there's the design. There are some differences between this and other Predator monitors, but they seem mostly the same when you're looking at it from the front. They have these same metal legs, which I think is a terrible choice for an esports focused monitor, because if you're trying to be as competitive as possible, and if you look at pros for example, usually you'll want to be able to smell the monitor. With these legs, and also the Asus and the Alienware for that matter, you can't bring the monitor close unless you have a monitor arm or stand, and I don't think anyone wants to carry that when they're traveling to LAN events. A small base should have been the only choice here. Anyway, the stand is also metal but covered in plastic, has a wire routing hole, a headphone holder, and some Predator branding on the bottom and top. The back of the monitor is kind of funky looking, but I like it. The RGB is extremely bright, but I don't like how easy it is to see the individually lit LEDs. It would look much better if it had a smooth gradient flowing look to it. The centerpiece has a triangulated line effect, and I think it looks pretty cool. I thought these would be the vents for letting heat out of the monitor, but it's all design, no function. Instead, vents are at the top. The front is pretty standard. It's got your typical small top and side bezels, but the chin really sticks out here. It reminds me of the Crimson chin every time I look at it, but it's probably needed to house the ambient light sensor to control the auto brightness, which, by the way, I wish every monitor had that. I don't want to have to change the brightness every time it gets dark or bright. Anyway, it has 100 by 100 VESA mounting holes, 2 HDMI 2.0 ports, a DisplayPort 1.4 port, a headphone jack, a USB Type-B port to power the 2 USB Type-A ports, and it has tilt, height, swivel, and pivot adjustments, so gymnastics all the way here. So with all that said, is this a good monitor? And if so, should you choose this over its competitors? First, let's talk about who these monitors are for, because every time I make a video on a 360Hz monitor, there's always a few people that say, ew, 1080p? Who needs 360Hz? The human eye can only see 24 FPS. These monitors are for the highest skill level players, for already pros, or for people who want to get better and think that using a high refresh rate monitor will help them achieve this goal, which is what I did back in 2017 with my Zowie, and man, did it help. As for which of these 360Hz monitors I think is best, they're all the same. Their black equalizers don't do as much in terms of brightening up the scenes, although the Acer and the Asus has color vibrance, whereas the Alienware doesn't. Their response times differ marginally, except for the Acer's extreme setting, but you'll never use that anyways. They have the same maximum refresh rate, they all have a physical G-Sync processor with the same backlight strobing technology, similar maximum brightness, similar minimum brightness, equally disappointing contrast ratios, and similar gamut coverage. The only real difference here is that the Acer and the Asus both have ambient light sensors to automatically adjust the screen's brightness, and the Alienware does not. And if that's something you care about, then that helps narrow down your decision. And since they're all basically the same, another thing that may sway you from one monitor to another is brand loyalty. Now, I never understood this. I never go for the product just because of the brand. I get what's best, but there really isn't a best here. So when it comes down to this part, choose your favorite brand or design. What might sway you even more though is the price. At $800, the Acer is the most expensive monitor on this list by quite a bit. The Asus and the Alienware are at least $100 cheaper, and it's like, why get this when I can get the same monitor with arguably a better design for at least $100 cheaper? But yeah, that's it. I don't think there's a true conclusive winner, which kinda sucks. It seems that manufacturers are just grabbing a panel straight off the shelf, throwing it into a monitor and saying, wow, look at this amazing 360Hz monitor, holy crap! When in reality, it's already getting old at this point, at least for me. Maybe Acer can do something special with that overclocked 390Hz monitor they have coming, but if it seems the same with just Nitro branding, I won't bother to review it because this is getting boring. I want a 360Hz monitor with something new, interesting, and one that's distinguishable from the rest. Thanks for watching, and have a great day every day. Peace.